The charity it will be entirely impartial in relation to the forthcoming referendum. But I read the piece and I thought if I was arguing for a staying in vote, I would feel quite ambivalent about your piece. Because on the one hand you say Britain should stay in the European Union, so I think that's great. And then your argument basically is you should stay in because it's completely crap. But as long as Britain stays in, there'll be one or two of us who are trying to make it better. And I thought, I'm not sure that's going to convince that many people. So I'm obviously traducing your argument, but do you want to share with us why it is you're encouraging the people of Britain to vote to stay in?
Look, where do I begin? That the European Union is abysmal, there's no doubt. So anybody who wants to convince you to vote for Remain, who starts by saying, oh, the European Union is rosy and wonderful and beautiful and don't listen to its bashers and so on and vote to stay in. You're not going to convince anyone because you can't fool people that way. The reason why I'm arguing in favor of the Remain vote is twofold. Firstly, you can't really get out even if you vote for Brexit. The Brexit argument is that Britain will reclaim its sovereignty from Brussels, do good things with the Chinese, with the Americans and so on, sort of sail away under the Atlantic towards a kind of reconstituted empire, but remain in the single market of Europe. That simply can't be done. A single market is not the same thing as a free trade area. It's not just a question of not having tariffs and quotas. A single market, to be a genuine single market, requires three things in addition to free trade. It requires common industry standards. So the gadgets that are sold here must have exactly the same standards as the ones that are sold in Estonia and in Greece and in Portugal. Somebody has to decide what those standards are. And who decides those standards also decides which companies to favor to a very large extent. So it's a political issue. It's not a technical issue. Secondly, you need similar or identical, I would say identical, labor protection standards. Because if you don't, then you have a market, let's say that Greece goes back to slavery and to allow slaves to be employed, then suddenly we have an unfair competitive advantage against countries where slavery is not allowed. So to have a single market, you have to have a level playing field when it comes to labor markets. So you have to have harmonization of labor market legislation to have a genuine single market. And you need common environmental protection standards. So if Polish companies are allowed to pollute to their heart's content, whereas Welsh or English or Scottish companies are not, then that creates a competitive disadvantage, not a single market. But if you're going to have common industry standards, labor market standards, and environmental protection standards, you need to have three branches of power to impose those standards. You need a common judiciary, you need a common legislature, and you need a common executive to impose those pieces of legislation. So you need a state. So you need full sovereignty anyway to be in the single market. And if you step out of the European Union, effectively what you're saying is, we're going to give all this authority to Brussels and we're not even going to be in it. So this is my Hotel California quip. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. Yeah? So that's the first reason why you should stay in.
You know what this reminds me of? I don't know if you've been watching Trapped, the Icelandic series, but this is like Britain as Andre, kind of wandering around as everybody kills everybody else in this kind of blasted, snow intense, there's nothing we can do. We just have to kind of wander around looking miserable.
No, there's a lot we can do.
Ah, good.
But we can't just leave. We cannot just take our stumps and leave. The second reason for staying in is that the greatest fallacy in this debate, pseudo-debate, because the debate is really very poor, just like prior to your general election, both sides make this mistake of the referendum. They assume that the European Union is a constant, it's a given, it's on the other side of the British Channel, it's there. And then they're fighting amongst each other as to whether this is something we want to be part of or not. Well, the European Union is not a given. It's not a constant. It is a disintegrating lot. It is changing, and it's changing in a very bad way, in a way that already is creating huge centrifugal forces that are pulling France apart from Germany, I mentioned that before, the North from the South, and now the East from the West. And this manifests itself in a variety of ways, not just in terms of the banking crisis, the debt crisis, but also in terms of the refugees, our inability to deal with a problem that we used to be able to deal with quite easily if we were united and had a proper European Union. Brexit would destabilize further and accelerate the disintegration of the European Union. Now, if I'm right in my prognosis, and this is part of this book's raison d'etre, that the disintegration of the European Union is going to lead to a major division between Germanic states, surplus states. I'm talking about a fault line developing along the Rhine, the River Rhine, and then the Alps, with countries like Germany, Poland, Austria, the Netherlands, Finland, the Baltics, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, becoming one bloc with effectively the Deutschmark, a reconstituted Deutschmark.
It was the Golden Triangle, didn't it, that space?
Well, it will be golden, and that will be a terrible thing, because the Deutschmark, which will be golden, is going to go through the roof. It will be appreciating massively, as everybody will be expecting it to, therefore it will. And that will create a very serious deflationary shock that will in turn boost unemployment no end in places like Germany and so on, converting lowly paid workers into unemployed workers. The rest of Europe, with a depreciating currency that they will have, or currencies that they will have, will be facing significant inflation and low employment and low investment. That will be like a black hole in the middle of the European continent. Britain, whether you stay in or stay out, is going to be consumed by it. You are not going to be able to escape. It will be another Great Depression. It will be another 1930s. So, firstly, you are not going to reclaim your sovereignty by getting out. And secondly, you will be destabilizing Europe further, accelerating a process that will make Britain suffer. That is a good reason to stay in. And, you know, Jon Snow in Channel 4 News yesterday said, very briefly, you know how television is, very briefly, Yanis, what would you do if you were British and you had to vote? I would say I would vote to stay in, to fight Brussels from within.
Now, at the very end of, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to ask you to talk about the movement that you've created, because I think people will be interested in hearing what you're doing and how you're trying to do it. But let's take some questions before we come to that. And what we'll do is we'll take 3 or 4 together, and yes. We'll start here. Wait for the microphone. And if you could give us your name, that would be great. Then it'll be recorded for posterity.
Terence Bendixson, thank you for a very stimulating talk. Just a simple question. You seem to think that the European Union is really in a very parlous state. I think many of us do. Isn't it going to collapse anyway? And wouldn't it be better to be outside it when the collapse happens than inside it?
Hold on to that thought. Yeah, hold on to that thought. Yeah, let's go right to the back of the room there. If we can keep the comments as brief as that one, it'll be great. We'll get through lots.
Thank you. Delbert Sandiford. I agree with everything you said about the mathematical take on economics these days. But you have to have a model for making decisions. If you go back to Keynes, he had a very powerful narrative. If you look at something like development economics, Arthur Lewis had a very powerful narrative. No maths at all, but a very strong, logical narrative. Where would your narrative come from to help governments make decisions?
Very good. And here. And wait for the mic, sorry.
Thank you. Edmund Burke said that magnanimity was the greatest political virtue. Do you think it's possible in a democracy for governments to say, we've got this wrong, it can't work, like lending huge amounts of money to an insolvent state? Is that possible?
And to add to that, can governments in a democracy say we're going to do what's in the interests of the international community, not what's in the interests of our own nation in the short term? So, yes, if I can add that. So, if it's going to collapse, it wouldn't be better to be outside watching it collapse than be inside the building. What is the kind of economic narrative that we need right now? And can democracies be magnanimous and long-term in their thinking?
Well, no, I don't think that it makes much difference whether you're in or out. The building is collapsing, and whether you are in the heart of it or, you know, just on the side of it, it will be catastrophic. And I think that Britain should stay in because by staying in, this country has a lot to offer in the collective struggle of sensible European democrats to prevent the collapse. And even to handle a collapse if it happens. It would be much better handled if Britain stays in than if Britain doesn't. One of my criticisms of George Osborne during my time in ECOFIN was that when anything was discussed in ECOFIN that had to do something with the Eurozone, George Osborne simply abstained on the basis that it's got nothing to do with us. You created the Eurozone, we didn't like it, we stayed out, none of our problems. That was a big mistake, because Britain was affected by every silly decision we took in the Eurozone. And so that's my answer to your question.